I want to talk about the Fortnite World Cup and its place in the gaming world and in the esports world. So over the weekend, the Fortnite World Cup took place, and it was nothing short of a monumental success. I just want to read some of these numbers from their press release, all right? They released this yesterday over on epicgames.com. It says over 40 million players participated. Only the Fortnite World Cup champions remain standing. The best Fortnite players in the world met in New York City July 26th to the 28th to compete in the $30 million Fortnite World Cup solo and duos final, $3 million creative finals, and $3 million charity pro-am. This event was the culmination of 10 weeks of $1 million online open qualifiers with more than 200 countries participating. Over 19,000 fans attended the 3-day Fortnite World Cup finals in person at the sold-out Arthur Ashe Stadium. On Sunday, during the solo finals, concurrent viewers peaked at over 2.3 million across YouTube and Twitch, making the Fortnite World Cup the most watched competitive gaming event, excluding China, of all time. Guys, did you guys have a chance to watch any of this event?
I felt like I probably should have, since we talk about games, but it just doesn't interest me.
So I'd watched a couple matches of the finals just because I listened to a podcast they talked about how crazy the production quality of it was. I wasn't like super blown away by the production quality. I thought it was good. I think it was a technical feat to have 100 players playing all at one time on stage. But outside of that, I wasn't like super blown away with how the presentation was done. But regardless, I was like, I'll check out a couple matches because I know I wanted to talk about it. I grew an appreciation in those two games for the amount of strategy that goes into a Fortnite match, and it kind of helped color some of my opinions on RNG in games like this, because that tends to be a criticism of it, and we'll get to that here in a bit. But one of the main things I noticed just in watching it was how engaged the audience was and just entertained by it, despite the fact that it's really, really, really hard to keep up with what the fuck is going on in this game because there's so many people participating. But I don't want to necessarily talk about the event. I don't think we're really equipped to talk about the event since none of us watched, either any of it, or I only watched 2 matches, so not even a significant portion of it. What I want to talk about is the conversation that was going on around the Fortnite World Cup. And so let's just talk first and foremost about, like, what are your reactions to the overwhelming success of the event? Your thoughts on Fortnite as an esport and what this success may mean in the world of esports.
In spite of the popularity of Fortnite, I was surprised by the extent of the success. I heard people talking about this that I didn't expect to talk about. I walked into my church's staff meeting, and the senior minister says, "Did you hear about this Fortnite tournament where this kid won like millions of dollars? Isn't that crazy?" And I was like, "Yeah, did not expect to talk about this here. What?" So yeah, it was a huge deal, and I think that this is a good thing for legitimizing esports as a legitimate type of sporting, a legitimate type of competition in people's eyes. Like this isn't just like a bunch of people like just sitting around playing games. Like there's some real competition with real stakes, and people are winning real prizes. And I mean, the ball is already rolling on esports becoming legitimate and growing in popularity. One of the kids that's typically at my church camp wasn't there this year because he went to an esports camp instead. But this is going to be another big stride in that direction for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised by its success because we all know the reach that Fortnite has. But I still think like the numbers you were naming off are absurd. And I think this is a pretty significant milestone for Fortnite, obviously, but also, like Larry said, for esports. Obviously, we talk about esports a fair amount on this show because, Luke, you're super into that world, and I find that world interesting. And And we talk about it, and I sometimes feel as though we talk about it like we're in a bubble and we kind of overestimate the popularity of it in some ways. I do think obviously esports is massive. It's an industry that organizations in traditional sports have invested millions of dollars in, sponsors are investing millions of dollars in. It's massive. And League, Overwatch, Counter-Strike, all these games have a really solid esports foundation, a pretty sizable esports foundation. But when you look at something like this, which not only is massive in terms of its prize pools, but massive in terms of its viewership and the coverage it got, because you not only talk about the people who are talking about it out in the world, but this is being covered like a sport by traditional media outlets, like a traditional sport by traditional media outlets, which is pretty significant. Like some of these outlets have games reporters and have esports reporters because they've caught on to the fact that this is kind of the next wave of athleticism. But I saw outlets covering it that I never would have thought would cover it, like local outlets that have national sports reporters were covering it, which is pretty significant. And it tells you that the audience is there for this. The audience, they recognize that this is a thing. It's a legitimate thing. Like you said, Larry, this just furthers the legitimization of esports in the world. And that's like the coldest take possible. That's not, that's like very obvious.
Yeah.
But it's worth saying.
Yeah,
like this is
absolutely.
It's a major milestone for esports as a whole,
and for gaming. I think if esports is legitimized, I think we can finally start moving past you're just a jobless 40-year-old man child living in your mom's basement if you play video games.
Which, I'll be honest with you, I saw the people who were covering it afterwards, like, BBC, NBC News, Fox News. I saw that, I don't want to get the guy's name wrong. It's Kyle something. Kyle, is it Bugga? Giesdorf is the 16-year-old who won. He went on Jimmy Fallon's show. I'll be honest, I did not look at any of the coverage because I tend to just get frustrated by the way that people talk to these, esports competitors. Like, last year, for example, Jake and Raucus from the Houston Outlaws went on, like, I think it was Good Morning America, and like they did the whole like, oh, you live in your mom and dad's basement to him, and it was real shitty because it was like 2 weeks after Raucus's dad had died, and whoever was interviewing him didn't take the time to look into anything about him. And so I tend to not watch the coverage because I get secondhand embarrassment for the dumbass reporters who ask dumbass questions of these kids. But I did see the scope of the coverage and how massive it was. And it wasn't just like a segment, it was rotating segments, like, in national coverage, like, hey, we're going to run this story every 25 minutes. And like, and I think that that's huge. And so there was a tweet from esports consultant Slasher over on Twitter, and anybody who who keeps up with esports knows the name Slasher. And it was a super simple tweet. He just said, Fortnite is a tier 1 esport. And people had to come in with their hot takes about RNG and Fortnite's a baby game and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, consultant. Number 1 esports consultant, Beal for Real says. Slasher is kind of a polarizing figure in the esports scene. But regardless, you can see why, because this tweet was polarizing even in its simplicity. But out of all of the crazy hot takes that Slasher has, I think that this is the most objectively correct one. Like, how can you say that something that pulled in 2.3 million concurrent viewers gave away over $30 million in prize money and his national coverage in mainstream media, how can you call it anything other than a tier 1 esport? Like, we need to get beyond this elitism that we have in gaming, because we constantly fight this battle of legitimization amongst ourselves, not just in esports, but in gaming in general. And when we infight amongst ourselves and bicker and bitch over things that don't ultimately matter, like, all it does is make it harder and harder to focus our attention and really figure out how to drive the conversation forward in the mainstream so that we're not sitting through interviews with living in your mom and dad's basement jokes or what are you going to do when you grow up kind of things with 25-year-olds who are, you know, traveling around the world to participate in tournaments and things. Like, so I think Fortnite was a huge success. I do want to talk really quickly about the RNG thing.
Real fast before we move on to that, because I want to comment on that. It's a child's game. It's for kids, and I mean, granted, that's most of the audience for the game, but like not giving it credit where credit is due, and calling it childish. It's just so it just makes no sense to me. Like all of us who have this hobby of gaming have dealt with that, right? Like, oh, you like this thing? That's kind of childish of you. So why would we turn around and do that to somebody else? Like,
yeah,
just nonsensical.
Yeah, it makes no sense. One of the only like not legitimate, but seemingly legitimate arguments about Fortnite as an esport is the RNG thing. And I want to talk about this for a second. As an expert who watched 2 matches of this Fortnite World Cup, I made an observation, and it was this. In the first couple minutes of the match, only like 4 or 5 people died, which is insane to me. I figured like people be dropping left and right in this thing, you know, because there's such highly skilled players. And so the argument in any battle royale is like you're kind of beholden to whatever you drop into and get. But these players are so skilled and have their game plan in mind and their plan B and plan C and plan D for, you know, what scenarios they may drop into planned out in their head so well that it really doesn't matter what they find when they drop. They have something in mind to do in reaction to it. And so we were getting to the final circle in these 2 matches, and there were still like 30 people alive in this tiny ass circle with towers going, you know, 75 miles into the air as this tiny circle's moving across the map. And so I don't know. Just in watching 2 matches, I was like, I don't think the RNG in this thing matters as much as people are saying, because it was also a six game series. And the way the scoring works, like the more kills you get, the more points you get. You don't necessarily have to finish in first to win the round if you play aggressive enough. Like there are things to make up for the randomness within it that I think give it back its competitive edge.
Yeah, we talked about this the other day. And I think the RNG is there to a certain extent, but I think you're right. You know where the high tier loot areas are if you play the game long enough. Even people who aren't pros know those areas. I think I'm probably overestimated the effect that it can have on a game, but I think contrary to what people are saying, I think the light randomness it adds to the game is actually sort of exciting. It adds an unpredictability to it that I guess for a lot of people who love esports and video games at a competitive level, that might seem like something that's distancing, that kind of doesn't, they're supposed to be an even playing field. But I think your ability to adapt is part of the battle royale and speaks to your ability as a player. So I think it actually enhances the experience. I don't think it detracts from it.
And the reality is that even in actual sports, there are elements of luck. And I heard your guys' conversation on this actually the other night, but in soccer, you can't control, sometimes it's going to rain and that's going to affect how the ball bounces. You don't know if your shin is injured in such a way that when you come down from that layup, it's going to come shooting out of your leg and ruin all of our lives forever. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Scarred forever. Scarred. Like luck is a part of everything. And in mastering anything, in getting good at anything, there are people that realize that luck plays a role, but I need to learn how to do the best I can with what I've got. And then there are people that blame the luck element for all of their failures.
Like me. Like when I drop in Apex and I'm like, well, there were no guns in this area.
Right. And not to say that it doesn't make an impact at all, but I think that watching these people who are good at this game play should show us that the luck is probably not as big a reason that we're losing our matches as we would like to think that it is.
Oh no, I totally recognize this, that I'm bad at video games.
Right. Same.
Yeah. But I'm excited for the trickle down effect it's going to have for other esports as well, as people become more aware of the scene's existence. And I've told this story a lot on the PvA Nightly Rundown about how all it took for me to get into Overwatch League was seeing 10 minutes of the Overwatch Watchpoint show, which isn't even Overwatch League games being played live. It's 4 people talking about it. And I just enjoyed the production value of it so much, and how I grew up watching sports, and how similar it was to that experience I had watching sports growing up, that like I was instantly attracted to it. And now here I am, and I would say probably like 60% of my free time is spent watching esports. Like I fucking love esports. And so even if you're not into Fortnite, there are probably people who play Overwatch or League or Rainbow Six or, you know, Rocket League, that don't realize that there's a professional scene that goes along with this game that they love playing. And that they may see Fortnite has one and be like, man, I wonder if the game that I play has this thing. And all it takes is just a moment of them interacting with it to get it to fall in love with it. And like, why would we hate on something that gives people the opportunity to get connected to the thing that we love? Like, that's the whole thing with Fortnite too. Like, I don't particularly like Fortnite, but I FaceTimed my nephew on his birthday, and he was having a LAN party with his friends. There were like 5 people at his house all playing Fortnite together. And it was just like, that was me with Halo growing up, you know, or NFL Blitz, like back in the day. Why would I hate something that is getting my nephew into the same hobby that I've given so much of my life over to? Like, I don't know. It's just shit. We're shitty to each other in this gaming culture.
Also, why would you hate on something that's so clearly connecting people? Like, that's another thing. Events like this, and I saw this when I was writing about watch parties for the Boston Uprising. People would come into those bars and see how excited people were and would get a contact excitement from it. They might not understand 100% of what's going on, but they can recognize maybe the basics of what's going on. But whenever there was a massive cheer, you could see patrons who weren't watching the games look over. Some started to actually filter over and actually start to watch with the people, asking questions. Like, events like this are great for esports in general because it shows the level of hype and excitement around this stuff, and that gets people curious about it. The live experience is very powerful.